The political and religious views contained in these videos represent my own views as an American citizen, whereby I have not originated nor imposed my own private opinions onto my church. Therefore, I have not cooperated with my church to publish them. If they ring true, they must stand on their own. I kind of have to laugh when they say there's no evidence in Central America or Mesoamerica about the Book of Mormon geography. I mean, here's the sea west and here's the sea east over here. Here's the river Sidon that dumps into the ocean. Here's the land of desolation, and here's the narrow neck of land that the Book of Mormon talks about. And they've measured all these walking distances that a marching army would take, from the land southward to the land northward and so on, and they match exactly with the timetables in the Book of Mormon. The most telling sign of a sure cover-up is when an investigator like Colombo notices how much work complicit people are doing to reframe things to appear differently than they actually are. He would notice right off that anti-Mormons use 40-year-old outdated information to declare that there was no archaeological evidence for the Book of Mormon. He would easily discover through his own research that the place of Nahom was recently discovered in the exact location the Book of Mormon pinpoints, with the name Nahom written on ancient stone. Completely unknown or impossible information for someone in Joseph Smith's day to find out. Then, as a clever research man, he would discover that the route from Nahom to Bountiful was exactly east, mapped in the Book of Mormon. He's told how impossible it is to find a tropical spot in the middle of a giant desert, but here it is on a satellite photo. A tiny little tropical spot that no map or book had written about in Joseph Smith's day, over 100 years afterward. So right after you plainly show them exactly how someone tricked them about Mormonism being false, they ignore it and go right on as if they never saw it. That's what cult members do. They choose to be blind no matter what happens. E.D. Howell in 1834 declared that the ancient Israelites could not possibly have had steel swords in Book of Mormon times. Clark Braden declared that the Israelites knew nothing of steel swords, therefore devastating any truth in the Book of Mormon. Archaeologists have recently discovered an Israelite sword in the earth, dating to exactly Book of Mormon times, made of steel. This sword is now on a display in Jerusalem. These items are made of metal and copper, found in North America. Are they not swords? The critics of the church say they have found no swords, but all of a sudden they are finding swords that look exactly like this one here that was found. We even see ancient murals showing that same sword being used in ancient times, but the critics say nothing when the discoveries are pro-Book of Mormon. One of the greatest criticisms of the Book of Mormon is that they have never found any barley in ancient America. Well, recently archaeologists have found barley in America, and the critics of the Mormon Church have gone completely silent, acting like it never happened. Critics love to say that the Book of Mormon is wrong about there being horses in ancient America. But recently, ancient horses have been found in America. Now considerable evidence exists that ancient horses recently were here, but the critics of the LDS Church simply ignore it and go on like it never happened. The critics also love to say that the ancient Americans didn't have the use or invention of the wheel. But here's an artifact found in pre-Columbian times, thousands of years old, that has wheels and axles on it. Here's an ancient artifact from Central America that has wheels and axles on it. It's a toy, but toys are often modeled from the real thing. It's very possible that ancient chariots would not look anything like we would imagine from the movies today. But there's no question that they knew what the wheel was. Today, archaeologists find hundreds of miles of ancient cement highways. Why would you build a cement highway if you didn't have wheeled chariots or carriages? In the early days, the church was considerably criticized about ancient cement buildings and cities. A highly educated scholar sent this letter to the prophet. There has never been found and never will be found a house built of cement by ancient inhabitants because the people in that early age knew nothing about cement. This just goes to show that just because scholars haven't dug something up yet and never found it, that it doesn't exist. So what are you going to do? Go to court and try to prove to the judge that there's no evidence about the Book of Mormon when they've actually used the Book of Mormon to track down exact locations even with the right name? Talk about creating straw men. You'll see entire anti-Mormon films and videos online talking about Mormon coins, when the Book of Mormon never mentioned coins.
Nephite coins, and coinage wasn't really invented until after Lehi has left Jerusalem.
There have been no coins found in ancient America because they didn't exist, and they don't exist in the Book of Mormon. It describes pieces of metal. It says nothing about them being stamped or minted, which is what makes a piece of metal a coin. There's no reason to expect to find Nephite coins because I don't think they ever existed, and the Book of Mormon doesn't claim they do.
Let us connect the dots. The Book of Mormon actually talks about weights in order to weigh precious metals, in order to determine the monetary value of precious metals. What happened is one of the brethren 100 years ago or more assumed that this was coinage and put that in the heading when they didn't really understand. Recent archaeological discoveries about Book of Mormon localities, which match the Book of Mormon exactly, even by name, is incredible. For the critics of the LDS Church to ignore this information is not only dishonest, but it's unchristian. The prophetic and biblical model for Israel is all about the fruit bearer, Joseph, disappearing as if he were lost from the world. The unknown location of Joseph's tribe today, suddenly coming back again, as if it were from the ground or from the dead, which explains the entire Christian world today ignoring the words of Jesus Christ, where he promised to take away the kingdom of God from the other tribes of Israel and even Judah and give it to the fruit bearer, Joseph. This deliberate oversight of the entire Christian world demonstrates that they will ignore the fact that in the last days the tribe of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh are to push Israel back together or gather Israel for Jesus Christ. They ignore their own Bible. Does not this ignoring of Joseph, even in the Bible, explain why they want to get rid of Joseph Smith? Make him disappear. Make him out to be crazy. Like Joseph of old, put him down in a pit. Get rid of him. Hide him from the world. Just like ancient Joseph. Why the Book of Mormon people are also gone, seem to be invisible to the world, hidden and ignored by the Christian world. The reality of the power of the dark side of the force, Satan, to hide the truth even from the Bible about an unlearned man receiving a book of Scripture in the latter days. The ability to blind the Christians, millions of them, from even paying attention to it in their Bible. They know very well that the Bible itself declares that this young man must receive this important book. They know very well that it is God who says, I will proceed to do a marvelous work among this people because of that book. It's like thousands of Christian ministers who exercise the Jedi mind trick. Pay no attention to what you see. There's nothing to see there. Look away. Any such report about a book of Joseph's tribe coming out of the ground, get the heck out of there. Run. You'll go to hell if you believe this. Even if it is predicted in the Bible. The Bible's got to be wrong. Run. Pay no attention. False prophet. So the very people that are calling Mormonism a cult are the ones who are doing what cults do. They refuse to acknowledge the real answers to their own complaints about Mormonism. They go on blindly even after you show it to them in the Bible, like they never saw it. Some of you might remember that John Whitmer copied these Book of Mormon glyphs. Book of Mormon doubters assumed that Joseph Smith just made all this up until something happened recently. In 2015, Jerry Grover, an engineer and recognized linguist, has demonstrated a credible body of numeric and linguistic glyphs that, when applied to the Book of Mormon characters here, show and yield a compelling number of calendar time frames. Jerry Grover speaks several languages and works as a translator. John Whitmer copied the Book of Mormon glyphs, and Jerry went to work on his book, doing something amazing and comprehensive with Egyptian and ancient American numerical glyphs. Jerry collected a large body of text so patterns could be identified. There ought to be a set of linguistic and mathematical rules that can be instantly applied to these glyphs, which can translate into dates, names, idioms, and history. It is an ancient form of cryptography. It is a science of establishing the correct keys, which when found contain a highly meaningful message. A message when the correct combination is struck. The underlying message, therefore, and number patterns appear on the page when it is found. Each glyph is associated with specific number patterns, which are linked directly to the translation, which is so specific that it could not possibly be manipulated. You can actually download Jerry's book free online. But is there comprehensive evidence that Joseph Smith used numerical combinations to translate from one language to another? Watch this. With the facsimile seen in the Book of Abraham, hieroglyphs are associated with numbers and number combinations, which directly translate into a spiritual understanding on the opposite page. Each of Joseph Smith's translations are directly associated with a specific number. In Joseph Smith's Alphabet and Grammar book, we see evidence of him translating hieroglyphs into codes or numbers, which translate into a message or revelation about Abraham. Here we see what Joseph Smith calls an Egyptian alphabet being directly associated with numbers down here. Since we do not have the Book of Abraham original scroll, which burned up in the Chicago fire, we cannot check the system with Jerry Grover's book or his system in order to check out whether the same system of translation was being used in the Book of Abraham. However, through my new videos, I can show how the number system that Joseph Smith placed in the book itself can translate these hieroglyphs. So we demonstrate exactly how this is done on my YouTube videos 2 through 7. So the translation is really so simple, it's almost elementary. We take the hieroglyph from the facsimile over to the number that Joseph Smith gives us and lines it up for the translation. It's very easy. Each glyph is already identified with numbers and codes. So since this is all encrypted, we have to match up the glyphs with the right code in order to translate it into the proper decryption. And the amazing thing is after you decrypt this, it does not match up to mythology anymore, but into a biblical understanding. So these facsimiles obviously have a separate purpose. Joseph Smith says he's adding these figures so we can understand false gods. He doesn't call this translation, he calls it explanation. In other words, explanations are what is required to understand these facsimiles. This encrypted information we find out about Abraham's covenant history, connecting Joseph and Egypt with Joseph Smith, a calendar of 7 dispensations of time from Adam to Joseph Smith, numbers which identify restoration dates like 1800 for Joseph Smith, even 1805, the year Joseph Smith was born. The text warns us that the secret combination in America today is modeled after an ancient blueprint like the one that destroyed the Nephites. Today we see that same combination, that same word combination, describes the deep state. Is it a combination of corrupt law enforcement at the highest levels of the FBI and the State Department, foreign governments, who use the excuse that everything is classified or top secret in order to hide all the secrets of their constitutional controls and crimes? So to make the combination work, do they include the corrupt court judges who legislate secrets of the deep state in order to work against our freedom? Then we include the press, the secret combination that also hides the secret agenda by including lies to divert the public mind into a non-suspicion state. Is it a combination of corrupt law enforcement at the highest levels of the FBI and the State Department, foreign governments, who use the excuse that everything is classified or top secret in order to hide all the secrets of their constitutional controls and crimes? Does the secret combination also include the foreign powers who work to benefit and seize power over our entire country? One of the means by outsiders subverting our country is by trade and extraction of our wealth and property, to rob us of our technology and advantages over them, to weaken our resolve. How about directing the media to inspire class warfare, racial division, and civil war? And the most lethal weapon of all is the leftist education system, which destroys faith in God and patriotism. I submit that the ancient similar model was used to destroy the Nephites, including outside subversion through trade and stealing away the superior advantages and technologies of the Nephites, as well as secretly corrupting them within against their God, the source of their power. Again, an ancient deep state involving corrupt judges and weaponizing of the law enforcement against good people. In about 303 AD, because of the wars and bloodsheds, there was a whole-scale abandonment of the population and the archaeological sites. The Nephites were driven out by their enemies northward, the book says. You know, with the loss of 116 pages in the Book of Mormon manuscript, that's a very large part of the book. It's possible Satan may have been able to conceal another key player in the downfall of the Nephites. In fact, we read right in the text of the Book of Mormon itself how Satan will do anything to keep his plans hidden from us, his secret combination from coming to light. Therefore, he would hide the plan even from us in our day. When civilizations fall, there's what we call a third-party law, like a foreign power that we don't see, that wants their technologies, that wants to destroy their nation in order to benefit from that downfall. They sought the knowledge and advantages from the Nephites. So who could this third party be? Satan always hides the third party from our view. Could it be someone that they traded with, who pretended to be their best friends, but secretly sowed divisions of warfare and hatred between the Lamanites and the Nephites? It would have to be a civilization of people more advanced than the Lamanites. Someone who was able to educate the Gadianton robbers how to bring down the Nephites within their own government. Perhaps Gadianton himself was not educated by the Lamanites or Nephites, but was a foreign agent, a subversive agent from this third-party civilization. So wouldn't this foreign third-party power have to be in the north area of the narrow neck of land? Because that was the trade route for the Nephites. But does anybody ask the question, who were the Nephites trading with in the north? Surely Nephites seeking honest and fair trade with Lamanites would not be productive for the Nephites. They surely wouldn't trade with the Gadianton robbers either. It would have to be trade with someone else economically capable of civilized trade, someone capable of pulling economic strings to their advantage. Of course, back in ancient times, we would not recognize the names of Mayans or Incas back then. It would have to be these people up here of the north, however, the people of Teotihuacan. But these people were cunning enough to see that God was blessing the Nephites with superior technology, agriculture, superior knowledge and education and language, and the secrets of the Nephites' power was their God. In our day, the LDS Church has identified communism and socialism as the great secret combination that threatens our freedom today. The very first principle of the Communist Manifesto was to corrupt the youth, get them away from religion. In other words, remove God from their hearts and minds, thus removing God from their nation. So just as socialism and communism and their teachings was brought into America by foreign subversives, so likewise did foreign subversives bring in the teachings of the secret combination to defile the Nephites. And it came to pass that after some years had passed away, there came a man among the people of Nephi, in other words, an outsider coming in, whose name was Shurim. And it came to pass that he began to preach among the people, and to declare unto them that there should be no Christ. And he preached many things which were flattering unto the people. And this he did that he might overthrow the doctrine of Christ, Jacob 7:1. And he was learned, that he had a perfect knowledge of the language of the people of Nephi. In other words, he was trained as an outsider to know their language. Wherefore he could use much flattery and much power of speech according to the power of the devil. So now in another time, in an ancient place, we have an attempt, like the Communist Manifesto, to remove God and religion from a nation. So could it be the people up here of the north who were idolaters and had secret plans of wickedness to bring down the nation of the Nephites for their own benefit? And is there any evidence that these people of the north were trading with the Nephites in order for their own benefit? And thus they, meaning the Nephites, did enable the people in the land northward that they might build many cities, both of wood and of cement. Helaman 3. Could the Nephites' knowledge of how to build things out of cement be something they could teach the people of the north? And also shipping timber, because the people of the north did not have timber. And it came to pass that timber was exceedingly scarce in the land northward. They did send forth much by the way of shipping, in other words, a trade route. And thus they did enable the people in the north. The Nephites enabled the people living in the north, that they might build many cities, both of wood and cement. So it looks like to me that the Mayans and the Incas and many of these other groups gained their knowledge of how to build great cities out of cement to build pyramids out of cement came from the tribe of Joseph, the Nephites, who came from Joseph in Egypt, who knew the arts and sciences of the Egyptians, and brought them to America and taught these people how to build out of cement. The Book of Mormon talks about high towers made of cement. Are we to believe that the Mormon missionaries went down there and built these structures just to make it look like the Mormon church was true? At this point he says, "This is the most amazing false prophet I've ever seen. Everything they try to convince me he did wrong turns out to be correct." Then he starts to wonder why we've got pyramids here in America that look almost exactly like the step pyramid in Egypt. Was not Joseph of Israel prime minister of all Egypt? Would he not have taught the arts and sciences of the Egyptians to his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh? In about 303 AD, because of the wars and bloodsheds, there was a whole-scale abandonment of the population and the archaeological sites. The Nephites were driven out by their enemies northward, the book says. According to the book, these terrible wars drove these Nephites further and further north. In other words, they abandoned all the cities that they had built. So it was after the Nephites abandoned their faith in God and became wicked that their enemies had power over them to drive them out of their homeland. And today there's all kinds of archaeological evidence that the people of the north came down here to the south and reoccupied all of these ancient cities and stamped their culture of idolatry on top of what was originally a Christian nation. It is obvious, since the Nephites went north, that the Lamanites and some of these Nephites who had become wicked had joined with these people of the north and incorporated into their lives idolatry. In other words, cannibalism and everything you can imagine that was wicked became part of their culture. And of course, the conquest of evil would come into these lands and destroy any trace of Christian culture that was left, which most reasonably explains why Mormon and Moroni wanted to hide these records, the records of their religious culture, away from the enemies who sought to destroy every semblance of that culture. And we know the left today would destroy American culture if we allowed them to do it, even to destroy statues of George Washington, the father of our country. The increasing numbers of nativity scenes at Christmas time being destroyed across the United States. Make no mistake about it, if these people had the power today, they would burn the Bibles. They would destroy every semblance of Christianity out of our national roots and history. Every flag would be burned. So is it really that difficult to understand why a culture that hated Christianity in ancient America would do everything to remove every bit of evidence, every semblance of that Christian culture? That's exactly what they did. And of course, they would naturally do everything possible to replace any former memory of a religion with their own religion of idolatry. And the only real reason that Christianity survived in Europe was because they sold out to the government and became part of the government. Like unto the Babylonians and the Egyptians, Satan inspired the ancient American idolaters to counterfeit biblical teachings and turn them into myths of idol worship. Here is an illustration from the ancient Mayans Codex showing the first couple created in a Mesoamerican Garden of Eden and a tree. Amazingly, in this ancient myth, the woman caused the transgression of her husband, which caused the fall of all mankind. Of course, counterfeits are always slightly different. Instead of fruit being plucked off this tree, they plucked off the blossoms, causing the tree to break with a wound. The tree was considered alive, so it bled. And of course, this transgression caused mankind to fall from a high heavenly place down to a lowly cursed earth. Most amazingly, these ancient Mayans taught that after a man partook of this tree of knowledge, and he fell, that he began to see too many things with that knowledge. Therefore, the Lord had to blindfold him, so he'd have to walk by faith. The ancient Mayans believed in salvation by water and resurrection. Here we see a man being resurrected from a turtle shell, coming back to life. So exactly like I demonstrate with the book of Abraham, we can directly contrast these false Egyptian gods with the true God of heaven. We can contrast the difference between false and true and translate the false gods back into the true God of heaven. In other words, we can swap the Egyptian mythical creator back into the true Creator, Jesus Christ. So anytime someone wants to imitate the value of something that is true and valuable with something counterfeit, that means that the original value was there before the counterfeit. So just the fact that these ancient Americans were counterfeiting actual biblical teachings is pretty good evidence that the ancient Israelites were actually in America previously in order to establish these true beliefs in order to be counterfeited. There are ancient American hieroglyphs that are unique only to LDS teachings. For example, this child in the pre-existence coming down from heaven to the earth into the birth channel. Here, you see the footprints going into the birth channel, and we see the face of the infant coming out of the womb. So even though the hieroglyphs that we see in the book of Abraham are obviously counterfeits of the gospel, they are also witnesses of the true gospel. So why did the prophet place these hieroglyphs in the book of Abraham? Here's the answer. That you may have an understanding of these gods. I have given you the fashion of them in the figures at the beginning, which manner of figures are called hieroglyphs. In other words, the hieroglyphs were added to the book of Abraham so that you might have an understanding of how these false gods were fashioned. Abraham 1:14. So contrary to the anti-Mormon teachings, this is the real reason for the hieroglyphs, to make contrast with false religion and take it back to the true faith. Once you learn this trick or this teaching, you can prove the same thing with the Book of Mormon. Grab an ancient book called the Popol Vuh and contrast the ancient American counterfeit gospel with the gospel in the Book of Mormon and the Bible. You want real evidence the book is true? Here it is. Remember, the biblical essence of Joseph is to make him disappear, to put him down in a pit and make him invisible to the world. Satan wanted to remove the Abrahamic covenant, which would be officiated through the birthright tribe of Joseph. As we have shown in past videos, the facsimiles were pagan attempts to replace the Abrahamic covenant by replacing Joseph's identity with mythology. In other words, to make Joseph disappear by counterfeiting the priesthood covenant of his inheritance. Is this not why Satan wanted every one of the Nephites killed in the Book of Mormon? He did not want one trace of this tribe left, not even the DNA. So what are you going to do? Go to court and try to prove to the judge that there's no evidence about the Book of Mormon, when they've actually used the Book of Mormon to track down exact locations, even with the right name? Really? Really? You think you're going to take that to court? Once again, the truth of the LDS Church and its teachings is covered up, and you're only allowed to see the cardboard copy. Then they trick everybody and tell everybody that this cardboard copy is what Mormons actually believe in, the one that Joseph Smith set up. Therefore, they proceed to beat the snot out of it and act like they're exposing something that's evil and wrong and a lie. And today, because Joseph is invisible to the world and his covenant gone, Christianity is broken into many denominations, and none of them are even looking for the promises of Joseph given in the Bible. The people who dishonestly work to validate their own false beliefs by choosing denial in order to justify their anti-Mormonism are the real cult members here. Why? Because they are the ones doing what cult members do. Anti-Mormons who have been taking their objections to court are losing the cases. Anti-Mormons have this pathological agenda to destroy and cause division, above allowing any disclosure or true arguments to ever be made or reconciled. It's a cult-like ideology that does not win in court. You know, in a court of law, they can show that these people are inciting this division, and they have dishonest interpretations, which can be exposed to the public. Do these people actually think they're going to take their generic over-exaggerations of what Mormons actually believe and lie about it and make a point that sounds credible to justify their hate speech in court? Just as we've already seen recently, they lose. These attack methods remind me of the way the liberals go after good people. You know, this is polarizing good people against other good people in a way that's not good. Christians who follow Christ need to have respect for all good people who are on the same team trying to make society better. The effort for tribalism by the anti-Mormons makes people look like they're playing God over others. I'm concerned about this kind of dialogue. that divides people against other people, making LDS critics into a cult-minded group of tribal identity. This tendency to characterize every argument to fit a group identification, rather than allow people to differentiate both sides of an argument. What I see, in my opinion, is these people are weaponizing their arguments by characterizing LDS leadership as conspirators of hostility and division in the world. They do this by how they define Christ's doctrine. What if we all did that to every church out there? Did Christ ever teach his people to start a public uprising against all churches they disagreed with? So anybody foolish enough to think that they could take this into a court case would lose.
In the Doctrine and Covenants, Joseph Smith prophesied that Missouri would become Zion in their generation. This clearly was a false prophet.
Well, you have to look at the whole context of the Doctrine and Covenants, and a lot of people, of course, aren't aware of the context. In the Doctrine and Covenants, the Lord made an agreement with the saints there that if they would follow his commandments and his covenants, that he would give them Missouri as an inheritance for Zion. But of course, as we know in the LDS history, they would not live the law of consecration. They did not follow their covenants, and so that promise was revoked. Now, there's nothing different about that than what you see in the Bible when Moses came to the promised land away from Egypt. And what happened there is God had promised them that they would receive as their inheritance Jerusalem, or as Zion. And in that instance, the people did not follow Moses. They did not follow the covenants that they'd made with the Lord, and the Lord postponed their inheritance. And they wandered for 40 years in the wilderness before they were able to come into Palestine. And so what you see is the very same thing happened in this instance. It doesn't mean that the prophecy is false. It means that the promise of the prophecy was not fulfilled by the people who had covenanted to follow it. And so I realize that people take that out of context and try to make it appear like it's a false prophecy. But it's because they don't understand the covenant-making process. And if you don't follow your covenants, nothing works out for you. And that's true in business or in religion or anything else.
Was Joseph Smith's prophecy that the Independence, Missouri temple shall be reared in this generation a failed prophecy? Once again, the anti-Mormons hope people are not very smart. There's a double standard of interpretation that the critics use against Joseph Smith, since Jesus Christ himself used the very same terminology. In Matthew 24, he says, "Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass away till all these things be fulfilled." Luke 21:32. He repeats the word generation several times. It does not just mean a few years. The anti-Mormons hope to make you think that a generation is only 40 or 50 years long. But the terminology of generation in the Bible could mean 2,000 years. In other words, the entire church age. The term "these things" refers to wars, famines, the sun being darkened, and even the stars falling from heaven. Some of these things occurred during Christ's time period. Some have continued since then. Some have escalated into our time. Some have not yet occurred. The new temple in Jerusalem is to be reared in this generation. Therefore, that's been 2,000 years. Certainly, since Joseph Smith, his temple could be reared in just a couple hundred years and still be within the context of generation. Let these people take this into a court of law. They will lose. Critics like to teach people that the LDS Church practices blood atonement. Actually, it refers to sins like murder and torture that were stated in the Bible. Grievous sins punished in the Bible by death. But in the New Testament, it was considered symbolic. A sin against God was identified by anyone offending one of these little ones, deserving a milestone to be placed around his neck and then be cast into the sea. Or, rather than to commit sin, your eyes are to be plucked out and your limbs cut off. Better to kill the body than be cast into hell. Jesus himself clearly says this. I remember a liberal professor reading these passages from the Bible to a bunch of college kids. He told these college kids that Christianity was far more gruesome than any other religion because Christ was telling people to mutilate each other for sinning against the church. Of course, all the kids were disgusted, and all the Christians in the class were laughed at by the whole class. The Christian kids were very embarrassed. They did not know how to answer or defend Christ for saying something so gruesome. The thing that was missed was this was all symbolic and meant to teach something by striking a sharp comparison, and not something literal. Christ never ordered this to actually be done to somebody. The same biblical teaching is true today in the LDS version of it, where almost the same comparison to transgression was made in the biblical style symbolism used in the temple. If you notice, the LDS critics fail to tell you that no one ever had such a thing done to them. Not one. Not one mutilation case exists in all of Mormon history. If so, find it. If anti-Mormons could show a case like this in Mormon history, they would exploit this worldwide. But it doesn't exist. Believe me, if they could find one, they would use it. The only LDS person executed for murder was John D. Lee, who was hung by the territorial laws of murder for disobeying the laws of the government and the church at the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Like it or not, the policy of the church is to be carried out by the state, not by the church. But exactly like the Bible, murder is punishable by death in the scriptures. The guy who ordered the Mountain Meadows was an apostate who disobeyed the prophet and didn't heed what he was taught in church to forgive all those men who had offended him, including the Missourians. So anybody foolish enough to think that they could take this into a court case would lose. So here's a real dirty trick that they played to make Joseph Smith's prophecies appear false. Joseph was commanded by the Lord to go in and gather treasure from this great city that they were teaching the gospel. In other words, the treasure was converts. When missionaries go out on a mission, the treasure they seek is converts. It's not going after riches to get themselves rich. Yet the anti-Mormons pretended that this was their goal. So the mentioning of Zion paying down her debts, in other words, the debts of the church, with silver and gold mentioned in verse 4 is equated with the treasure of many people being converted. In other words, that suggests that gathering of converts into the church is gathering their resources, more tithing. So this was a very effective but sinister way to hide the fact that the prophecy was actually fulfilled. By March of 1842, they had organized the Salem branch. By the end of that summer, the branch had large numbers of converts. These conversions were sufficient to be noticed and commented by Salem's top newspapers, the Salem Gazette on December 7, 1841, and the Salem Register on June 2, 1842. The prophecy was fulfilled, the treasure of converts was made, and the debts of the church were paid off. These critics of the church love to make this assertion that Jesus and Satan were brothers. But before you get all flustered, let's examine what the Bible says. In Job, there was a time before the earth was even created when all the morning stars sang together. This was up in heaven, and all the sons of God were shouting for joy. Job 38. Obviously true here and in many other places in the Bible, the sons of God are called stars. In other words, that's a metaphor. They represent the sons of God who are called stars. Clearly in Revelation 12 and 4, the evil spirits that followed Satan were called the stars. 1/3 of the stars of heaven are 1/3 of the spirits in heaven. Revelation 12 and 4. One of the important points of the Bible is no unclean thing can dwell in heaven. Therefore, there must have been a time, since Satan and his angels dwelled in heaven, that they were not wicked, but became wicked over time. For clearly there was a time when all these sons of God were up in heaven singing when the earth was created. But Satan got thrown out, 1/3 of the spirits. Well, what about the other 3/4 who did not get thrown out of heaven? Were they spirits, or were they angels, or what were they? And that can only mean biblically that angels and spirits are exactly the same thing. For unless you're going to deny your own Bible, the Bible says that angels are ministering spirits, set forth to minister for them who shall be heirs of salvation. Hebrews 1:13-14. So the Bible clearly depicts angels, spirits, the sons of God, as all being the same thing. They're all the family of God. Even the Old Testament, who speaks of God himself, who maketh his angel. So these LDS critics are really not at war with the LDS Church. They're at war with their own family Bible. You could actually make the same silly point with Billy Graham or Martin Luther. You could declare that Adolf Hitler is related to Billy Graham, simply because all men are brothers according to the Bible. But tell me, what serious, intelligent Christian is going to go around making that point? It makes no logical or righteous sense to do so.